They were apart for about 15 years. They're back together now. This is their 20th anniversary. From the band Wishbone Ash, please welcome Ted Turner and Andy Powell.
Thank you. Can I have a little bit of vocals in the monitors, please? Well, good evening, everyone. Great pleasure to be here in Los Angeles. By way of introduction, my name is Andy Powell. This is Ted Turner.
Ted Turner. Pleased to meet you all.
All right. And before we go any further, people often ask why I wear the hat, because it's a bit of a trademark, but this is the reason. I mean, if anyone's got any donations, you know, I mean, we'll be greatly...
Sit around, all right?
Okay, well, history.
We started out in about, what, 1969, I believe?
Yep. Band formed in 1969, which is like 20 years ago. Before there were any effects, any echo, chorus, all that jazz, so...
If you could get an effect, it was usually the size of a suitcase in those days. Remember that? So if you could buy an effect, it was usually the size of a suitcase. So, have you guys got any questions? You want to fire away at anything, or what? No?
All right, well, we'll carry on giving you some background until you get a few questions going. Personally, I started playing when I was about 11, and the guy that influenced me the most, as he did with a lot of British guitar players, was Hank Marvin. Anyone heard of him? Shadows, yeah?
Shadows.
Well, he was a very, you know, I guess the similar band over here would have been the Ventures, and we used to play those little instrumental rock and roll songs, and from then I gravitated from that to a little bit of R&B, and then soul bands was a big thing in the late 60s. You know, we used to go out and play with, try and emulate Stax and Motown and that sort of thing. So I was primarily a rhythm player at that point. But the good thing about being in bands like that was that we used horns, and it was horns and brass sections that sowed that little seed, because we'd spend hours working out horn parts, you know, because none of us could play. I mean, the guitar players, the horn players, we were all just starting, but we'd spend hours working out these horn lines, which was exactly the same process that we went through when we formed the band and started the idea of the two lead guitars. Because the idea was to actually make a sound that was different, a concerted sort of section, a sound that was intrinsically melodic. So that was part of the background to that whole setup. How about you, Ted? What was your...
Well, I think that's the key word there being melody. I think that's why Hank Marvin inspired both of us, was because of that melodic music. I didn't start playing guitar until I was about 16 or so. And in England at that time, it was the sort of blues boom, John Mayall era, you know, Eric Clapton, Blues Breakers, so forth. I mean, the first band I ever saw was the Cream, if you can imagine that. The second band I saw was John Mayall Blues Breakers with Peter Green in it. And that was really the guy that inspired me to play by conveying so much feeling, but playing so little. And that really has always been the way I've, for me, approached guitar. It's never been from a technical perspective, but what actually, you know, you say with it. And I think other guitarists, well, as I say, it's that really blues period where we started. And actually, when Wishbone had formed, I think I'd been playing about 18 months, right?
Yeah. I think you'd gone for an audition with Colosseum, right? That was your first break.
Yeah, these are very old stable of musicians there. Dick Hexel Smith used to play two saxophones at the same time in harmony. John Heisman, well, was a jazz drummer, played with a lot of bands. They were very kind, but at that time I didn't know very much. 3 chords, yeah.
I'll tell you how basic it was back then. When we actually formed Wishbone, I mean, you can imagine, American instruments have been going for quite some time in this country, obviously, but they were few and far between in England. So, I mean, it was a big trip to go up to London and look at the guitars in the stores. There were only about 2 stores that sold Gibson or Fender, and we'd go up there and drool over them, you know. That was it. And I knew I'd never be able to afford one, so I had like a paper round, you know, and I worked for about 2 years to save about 40 quid, which is about, I guess, 75 bucks. And finally managed to buy the materials to actually make one. So the first guitar that I played in a band was a homemade job. And I called it the Les Powell, in fact. And it was a happening unit in the colloquial. But the good thing about making a guitar was that it actually really got me in touch with the mechanics of the thing, you know, how a guitar worked and what you could get out of it and the limitations. I mean, I couldn't afford humbucking pickups, so I managed to find a single coil pickup, and I made a double coil out of a fake piece of wood next to it. But it looked great, you know, it sounded like shit. But that was how basic it was, you know. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys can imagine a time with none of these effects and so on that everyone takes for granted now. I mean, especially in the last 10 years, I mean, it's been phenomenal, you know. We just can't believe. I mean, I think there was a dip in the 70s with equipment, and especially American guitars. I mean, they really went down the tubes, Gibson and Fender. And just because of that, we got into a heavy period of collecting. We used to go around all the pawn shops in about 1970, 72, and we just about cleared everyone out. Between us, we must have a collection of about 60 instruments. I think we had everything going. We had several Les Pauls and early Strats, the first year they ever made those, Fender Tellys. I remember I had Roy Buchanan's 52 Telly and a couple of the early issue Vs and so on. But now it's great because I think the American manufacturers are coming back with some really great instruments again, so the choice is infinite, you know. So, I mean, that's on the equipment line. I mean, we started out with equipment we used, the first break we got when we got a little bit of money, we got friendly with a guy called Walter Matthias, who made orange mat amps. And if you heard of those, the mat amps?
Original orange amps. Actually, before that, we made our own speaker cabinets and so forth. Even before that, due to lack of funds, didn't we? But for guitar sound, we have two guitarists playing together. If you're familiar with Leslie West, it would be sort of very difficult to have two Leslie Wests on stage. So it does end up being a sort of compromise sound-wise, because Martin, the bass player, we would get into three-part harmonies. So for that to be clear to the ear, obviously the guitar sounds are actually quite clean, and that's something we always look for.
Yeah, we're still pretty clean.
Yeah,
clean cut.
I mean, the way we got it set up right here, I mean, it was just very clean sound, and then you're going through the board, you know, which is basically doing anything. The way we're working right now, we're renting this equipment whichever country we go to. So, I mean, we both sort of got to a standard. I mean, you can find Fender anywhere in the world. They're very consistent, and it works, you know, for this sort of, we're doing the most with the least, as it were.
Yeah, when we first got in the recording studio, I mean, one of the key amps that we used to use were the old Fenders, the Tweed amps, a collection of Bassmans and concert amps, and we always liked those Jensen speakers, and that you can hear those amps on pretty much the first 4 or 5 albums. You know, but then as we progressed and we got into louder venues, bigger theaters and so on, we went for the orange gear because it was very loud and very clean. And then we experimented with just about everything after that. But Marshall, how many people play Marshall here? It seems to be popular, yeah. Well, we always found it difficult to get a real clean sound out of those, so you know, we kind of stayed away from them.
Yeah.
What else on the equipment line? Oh, well, my equipment tonight, I mean, I do use effects now. Boogie amps I really like. There's infinitely variable, great amplifier, and I use the TC2290, which gives me just about everything I could want, plus a bunch of external pedals and stuff, which I keep in a little drawer there, keep them off the floor, because on stage you just tend to end up tripping over them and so on. So I use, like, at the moment I'm using a Rat pedal, which is a pretty trashy thing, but it seems to do the job. And TC chorus, and I use a little graphic, you know, because sometimes I like to boost the mid-range. I find for lead that's good, and that's about it really. Strings, when we play a collection of Gibsons and Fenders, I use a heavier gauge on the Gibsons. It goes all the way from 9 through to 48, which I guess is quite heavy. I find that's, you know, because on stage especially you tend to play about twice as hard. When you're in the studio or playing in your sitting room, you tend to tinkle around a bit, you know, but with the adrenaline and everything, you know, you tend to use heavier picks, and heavier strings seem to work. Just recently I've got into this guitar. Music Man. Anyone seen any of these? It's about the closest I've found to, I'm a big fan of Tellys and early Stratocasters, and I think this was a Leo Fender design. And it's got like an early 50s style, almost triangular neck on it. Beautiful piece of bird's eye maple. And I've got this particular one set up with EMGs. It works pretty well. But the old Die Hard instrument is the Flying V here, which is, this one is actually a 66. And it's been modified a little bit. It's got PAFs on it from a 59-335, but other than that, it's pretty stock. And I've probably done quite a lot of good for Gibson with this guitar. It seems quite a few people started using it after seeing the band. It's got a great sound. I don't know whether it's the shape of the body. These sort of wings tend to make it very resonant and ringy. It's a bitch when you want to sit down and play the thing, of course, because it's like falls off, but I tend to play it like this if I'm sitting down. Just cross the old knee like that. That works quite well for me.
And the thing I like about the Music Man, you didn't mention, is that it was designed to fit in an overhead rack on an airplane, even in the case. I don't know if you know about that. That's a pretty nice feature.
It's a tiny instrument.
I'm sure you recognize this thing, PRS. I love the body of the guitar. It's machined like, say, a Mercedes or a BMW. You just pick it up and it's going to work. I didn't care for the electronics too much, so I customized that to what I like. It's basically an old Gibson pickup here, and I'm trying a DiMarzio PAF Pro on here. But usually we like a very warm sounding pickup. And then we'll do the rest.
PAFs are definitely what we prefer.
Yeah. So it's really the combination between Gibsons and Fenders. It's basically sound, which really most guitars are designed after anyway, independent of their, image to look at.
I mean, before we go on, like, are there any questions on guitar and the equipment that you're interested? I see someone over there's got a Flying V actually. This man. Where? That looks interesting. In fact, if you play for, like, we've been playing for 20 years, and Les Pauls are the worst. They actually can, over a period of years, put your shoulder out. In fact, Laurie Wisefield, who was in the band for a number of years, he's a tiny guy, and he played this Les Paul. And his left shoulder is actually way bigger, and it's out. It's about 2 inches lower. Right. Because of this this guitar. It's incredible. So yeah, it is. That's a good point, actually. Posture when you're sitting, especially these things are heavy.
Yeah. What you got? Yeah, basically all I've done, I've just got a 3-position switch here, and the coil splitter still there. Yeah, instead of the 5-position. Yeah. But I found they do make more pickups now, PRS. I haven't tried them, but the original ones, I found them to be very sort of narrow band, very mid-range. That's it.
Yeah, that's all right. Good. Ted Turner. Thank you.
That's a real old American instrument. I'm actually surprised as an English person that you know, it's not used more often than lap steel. It's actually a very simple instrument to play. Regarding, I mean, you don't need any right-hand technique. Obviously, you need a good ear for pitch. If you don't have good pitch, you're not going to go very far. But it's tuned to various chords. I'm sure you all know that. And that's, as I say, I'm surprised more people don't play them. Mm. Does anybody play lap steel here? No?
Not really.
See what I mean?
Okay, well.
Pardon? That was just A tuning, A major. The most common ones, well, in rock I would say, would probably be the E major, was like your classic Elmore James, Dust My Broom sort of thing. A major, G, and then you get into more exotic things like slack key tuning and the Hawaiian sort of styles.
Is anyone listen to the records, familiar with the band in any way? Yeah?
Yeah.
Great, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Well, basically, what I did was turn everything as loud as it possibly would go. I mean, if you remember the movie Spinal Tap, I was that man. No, we used to really, when we first came to America, we were used to recording in SCSI, like British. Before I go on, let me just get this right. I need some vocals through these monitors. I can't hear a thing. We used to record in SCSI British studios, and when we came to America, they put us in these beautiful East Lakes setups. One studio in particular I remember was Criteria Studios in Miami. It was absolutely beautiful, and I mean, we were just animals at that time. I mean, we didn't even know how to dress ourselves properly, and I mean, we used to go down there, and I wanted to get that sound, and I just could not. This place was all shag pile, you know, wall-to-wall shag pile, ceilings, floor, the whole bit. I couldn't get the sound. I couldn't get any feedback out of the amp. It was terrible, you know, because everything was close mic'd. It was all dead, you know. So I started out by recording the amp in the corridor, and then in the bathroom. Then it got really good. And then I used to put it back through the JBLs, and I actually got up on the desk. I was trampling around on this beautiful MCI Rolls-Royce desk here, and I had the guitar right up by the speakers, you know. So that's how I got that sound. I was standing with the speakers were up there, and I was, you know, getting it to feed back. It does sound kind of like a synthesizer, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, and that was around the period of, well, I think the Eagles were down there at that time recording. I think they came in shortly after and did Hotel California. And we actually worked a while down there with Simzik, who was a producer on that album. And we were like kind of like the sound check band for Hotel California. We worked in a lot of guitar sounds because we spent a lot of time. We did There's the Rub down there, and I think he would be the first to admit that he learned a lot of the techniques from the experimentation that we were doing in the studio at that time. You know, just trying to push things a little bit further. And I did, in fact, later end up using a synthesizer guitar. I used the first Roland, what was it, the 303? Real tacky little thing, blue box. Used that on a couple of songs. Worked well. Argus was, well, it still is, I guess, the album that most people associate with the band. A little bit of the history behind the sound that came out on that album was, I mean, I think you'll agree it's a pretty English-sounding album. I, in particular, at that time, was listening to players like John Renbourn and Pentangle and Fairport Convention, so a little bit of that influence was in there. Martin Turner, our bass player, who's here somewhere tonight. Oh, there he is. Here he is. He's an ex-choir boy, so he spent a bit of time singing in the choir and getting some classical feedback. And
yeah, I mean, I think our first album was recorded on 8-track.
Yeah,
I think that Argus was recorded on 16. Is that right?
I don't know. Was it Argus?
I believe so.
Yeah, the
16 track, right? Yeah.
So I mean, back in those days, 8-track was, but that was it. That was all you got. And in fact, we just recently remixed Argus for CD, and it's quite amazing that under those conditions, you go in the studio, there's just no bullshit. It's just go on, tune up and play, you know. And most of it was done pretty live with minimal overdubs. The great thing about that is you've got all this space in there, which it even stands up today. We recently did an album down at Jimmy Page's studio in Cookham, Surrey, in England. And I was just like mooching around his house. I mean, I was real nosy, you know, Jimmy Page. So I went into a cupboard, and there in the cupboard were the original masters for the 6 Led Zeppelin albums, right sat there. 1-inch tape, 8 tracks. It's amazing. They were just sat there in a cupboard. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for working with those limitations, I think.
Yeah. They're made by a German company, Hofner. It's actually, what it was, I arrived late in England to do the album Nouveau Cause, the previous one. It's the all-instrumental one, if you're familiar with that. It was actually for Miles Copeland. He asked us would we be interested in doing a project to launch this No Speak series, which he has. And we're glad that we did that. But when I arrived, all my equipment was stuck in the customs, so I was actually, and his brother Lenny, he works for our road crew, and he had one of these guitars, so I just raised the action right up and started playing. And then the company now actually gives me them, so I'm quite happy about that.
The early lap steels from the 40s, Gibson and Fender, thing that's characteristic. If you listen to any of that old Hawaiian music, they've got this really juicy sound. Anyone know David Lindley?
Yeah.
He's a top man, you know, we like his playing a lot, and he uses those instruments, and they have these like soap bar pickups on them. They're mega, they're really heavy duty.
I mean, for me, Ry Cooder inspired me to play slide guitar. You know, I mean, the guy's great. I'm sure he's inspired many of you if you're into slide guitar. What he actually uses is old pickups from National lap steels, and he puts them on Stratocasters.
Any guys? I mean, you're obviously pretty serious about the guitar and wanting to make some moves in the music business, and I mean, there must be quite a few questions on the business side of things, how you get started, how you gravitate into the business. Anyone like to sort of? Well, in a most basic possible way, Martin Turner and Steve Upton, this is the drummer and bass player, formed the band. They came up from Torquay and they just put an ad in the British newspaper, the Melody Maker. Just about every band in England, the musicians usually answer an ad in that paper. That is the, so it was that basic, you know, yeah. Same thing, yeah, exactly the same. And for me, it was the very first professional band I'd ever been in. I played semi-pro, and it was, the strange thing was we didn't have this idea for the dual lead guitar thing. I think both of us went along to the audition at separate times, and I think the problem was they couldn't decide between the two of us. So they said, well, hey, let's have two players, you know. And that's how it worked. The strange thing about it is that when you get into a band at that age, I mean, I was 19, you were what, 18?
Yes.
And by the time we were 21, we had #1 record in England. And we were on the road to America, and it was all flying at us. So one real good piece of advice I'd like to give to everyone is pace yourselves out, because when you're that age and you get that much success, you are totally clueless. Let's face it. I mean, you just don't know what to do with A, the money, B, the drugs, C, the women. Things are just flying at you from all angles. So, you know, it's really good to sort of... I guess we sort of learn.
I think the big difference for you guys now is the amount of competition out there. I mean, I know I've lived in LA for a long time, and just by looking in a magazine, you've got sort of 10 bands every night type of thing wanting to play, and they'll play for free because it's the only chance that they can get to play. So that's got to be tough. Pardon? You got to pay to play. Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
Well, we used to go and play.
But we used to play for free. You know, we'd roll up and say, "Have you got anyone playing? We'll play."
We used to turn up at people's gigs and just say, "Can we be a support act?" And you know, we'd force our way in. In fact, but when we first started, we couldn't get arrested. So the only place we could play was France. So we went out there and
got arrested out there.
Yeah, played at these clubs and to these bewildered French decadents, and you know, then finally we came back to England and started to get gigs, and then the band started to pick up, just little club gigs, and I think one year we did something like 250 gigs in the first year, and we did a gig with Richie Blackmore in what was the band? Deep Purple. That was them, yeah.
Actually, how that worked, it was like Andy was just fiddling around with his guitar on stage. It was quite a big concert hall, and Richie Blackmore walks on stage and puts in his gear, and he probably had about 3 times the volume as Andy, but he just played a lick, and then Andy answered it, and he sort of looks over, says, "Who is this guy?" So he plays another lick, it starts getting flashier each time, and then Andy would answer him back and add a note, you know, and it sort of it obviously impressed him, and he listened to the band, and what actually happened from that was he spoke to a man called Derek Lawrence, which actually produced the first 3 Wishbone albums. So it's amazing how breaks can happen from the smallest thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Before we got signed, well, I mean, Miles Copeland, who was the manager at this time, I mean, we just said, listen, we've got to get this band good.
It's about a year.
Yeah, we played solid for a year.
Yeah. It was just every little club you could think of, every night, you know.
Just, you know, that's the only way you get good, just play.
They have this motorway in England called the M1, and we used to be so poor that we'd drive up to some concert. The concert next day would be 10 miles away, but we couldn't afford to stay there, so we'd drive all the way back to London and all the way back up the next day. That's how
the great thing was, though, that he and I used to live in this condemned flat above a store, a small grocery store. So we'd creep in there at night. We'd have to go through the store. So we had no money for food. So I mean, I must admit, we used to lift a few TV dinners off the shelves, and you know, we had this 1 shilling piece.
Gas meter, yeah.
This 1 shilling piece that used to keep getting recycled through the gas meter. And those are the times that actually cement bands, you know, those kind of things. I mean, we've known each other for 20 years, and I think all those experiences tend to come up time and time again in the van, go to gigs even now, you know.
Yeah.
That's a debatable question. There was one other band in England with a guitar player called Jim Cregan in, who played with Rod Stewart, I believe, for a while. And he had a band called Blossom Toes. And he would say that that was the first twin lead guitar band, but they were very different. But as far as England goes, I think we pretty much were the first. Yes, sir. In the 80s? Well, for my money, Eddie Van Halen has probably taken it further than anyone else. The only drag about Eddie is I think a lot of people emulate him and miss the humour in his playing. You know, and it's sort of got like so crazy, you know. But I think he would be an instigator, and then after there's been many others. I tend to be like one of those kind of people that listen to what I call the gentleman guitar players, you know. I mean, I like people like Robert Cray. You know, Eric Clapton from time to time still turns it on, although he seems to, you know, emphasize the vocals a bit more. But Stevie Ray Vaughan I like a lot. Blues-orientated players seem to be the thing, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know about you, Ted.
I like Eric Johnson for his rhythm playing. I think he's, you know, amazing rhythm player. Buzzy Phaeton, if you're aware of him, very tasteful guitarist. See, the thing for us is when we're in our era of guitarists, the thing that really we wanted to have, or inspired to want to play guitar, was to have your own style. It wasn't anything about technique, really, in that sense. I know you guys are all here, and I'm sure you're very like the average talent now of a 16-year-old guitar player is amazing, phenomenal talent going on now. The technique has grown so much. But it's really not everything. It's a reason why you want to play, you know, what is it you want to communicate?
Yeah,
I mean, how important is it to you, you know?
That's a good point.
But the style, that's what was really important. And all those people that inspired us are still there today, like, you know, what inspired so many other people. As a band, I think Led Zeppelin has sort of had a hold, particularly on California music, even now. You know, it still inspires, say, all the heavy metal type of music. It all comes from that sort of genre.
The great thing about our, sorry, just before you ask another question, is the great thing about the band's music and the harmony lead guitar thing, if you check out those early records, is that they are almost like mini tutorials, or they were at the time. They're probably a bit dated now, but you could play those records down at 16 RPM and learn all the licks and get the basic techniques of hammer-offs and vibrato, you know, and so our band, for some reason, tended to be, you'd always hear our riffs, you know, in guitar stores and stuff, you know. But, sorry, what were you going to say? I was from London, Stepney originally, and the home counties, you know, but Ted's from Birmingham and the rest of the guys are from the West Country. But yeah, we had to move to London, so I guess, you know, you guys coming here to LA or going to New York, you've got to be in I think you've got to be in a major centre really to make it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, music wasn't a huge industry like it is today, you know. It was a laugh in those days. You just get in the van and go to the gig, get drunk, you know.
It was very small.
It's very small, yeah. I mean, everyone in London, sure, everyone knew everybody.
And we moved to London. We used to rehearse over at Marty's place, and a guy that used to help work for us came down one day and said, "Hey, look, John Lennon's in the studio, and he wants somebody to play guitar. He's doing some record, Imagine or something, you know." Ted says, "Yeah, I'll do that, you know." And so, you know, little things like that happened that were really neat. And I think you did play on that album, didn't you?
Yeah, well, we actually were recording at Apple Studios, and we were, I think it was Wishbone 4 or something. I've been in there all day long, and I get a phone call about 11 in the evening. "Would you like to do this session?" I says, "You have to be crazy. Who's it for?" "John Lennon." "Okay, I'll be right over."
No problem.
Yeah.
The thing is that for guitar players, once you've got a few riffs and licks together, you tend to rely on those quite heavily. We actually purposely stayed away from that in the early days, and we would construct the basis for a song, a tune, and then we'd say, "Hey, we want this guitar section in there." And any one of the three of us would come up with an idea. Very often, sometimes it was the bass player, Martin Turner, would come up and say, "Here, Andy, I've got this idea for a song, or tune in the middle of this." He'd go da 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 da, you know, "Can you play that?" You know, and you'd play it. And because it was something that was a vocal melody almost, by the time you transcribed it to guitar and put some technique into it, it sounded very different. And so there was that kind of thought went into it, I think.
Yeah, but the key again to it all throughout our history of music, it's always been about melody, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's really what feels right, you know, what's going to complement it the best way. What is the mood of the music, you know, what is it?
We try and get, you know, like sometimes we'll do 2 guitars in thirds, and then we'll add the bass a third below that. You know, we used to do that, and when you do that, you get this really thick sound. You know, and you can hear the end of Blowing Free, the riff at the end of that is an example of that, the 3-part thing. Which, in fact, if you check out Reeling in the Years, which came out after that, I know for a fact they not with Compete with Steely Dan, but they got that. Yeah. Pedals, endless pedals.
Just do the
discordial because there's a bass guitar missing, which supplies the root to that whole thing. But you know, that was an example. Well, that's true. Yeah, I mean, the competition is much greater now, so I really don't know. It's a difficult question. You know, it's tough to get gigs. You know, there are an awful lot. There aren't enough gigs. I mean, we even find it touring America. There's a club circuit, then there's the sort of theatre circuit. There's nothing in between. It's tough. I don't know. What would you say?
I mean, I don't live in America. It's difficult for me to sort of say what you should do in your own country. But
yeah,
as I already mentioned, I do know that it is. You know, there's so much competition out there, and it is tough.
The drag of it is that you really only get good by playing in front of people, because when you do it in front of people, there's no. You can't just stop and say, oh, I'll try that again, you know. So even if you can play like in a little wine bar or anything, you know.
The point is, before that, you've got to go, you has to start from the music. You know, you have to get together with people, you know, that amongst your approach, you know, when these parts, they all come together and they make something else that you can't make by anyone separately, individually. And that's very difficult to find. There's a certain chemistry. That is what happens with Wishbone Ash. When the 4 of us play together, there is some sort of magic that works. And it's difficult to find. In most great bands, you'll find that they've got their own formula, their own style, if you wish. And it's difficult. You know, if you're out there playing because you want to get off and, you know, mess around with women or something like that, you know, it's not really great for your music. You know, we've all been there and done that, but that's not what makes great music.
I mean, you know, it was like the music business itself and the musicians, everybody, it was just word of mouth, going around clubs, copying licks. You know. Really? Yeah. I think, you know, there is a lot to be said for just relying on your intuition. Although now I do wish I knew a little bit more about theory, you know, because there are limitations to that. But the thing about the early 70s and late 60s, that the emotion almost transcended the technique, you know, which was kind of neat.
And, you know, playing an instrument and playing in a band is a completely different situation as well. I mean, there's a guy back here, he's playing some licks. But when you play with a band, it's completely different. There's a lot of players that can actually play with a band, even though they can't play guitar very well.
This guy's got a question here.
Me personally?
$1 million question.
Me personally? Oh. Well, Danny's been touring the world and he's never stopped. I mean, I left the band about 1975. So I did a few. I needed to grow as a person, basically. As I said, I was about 18 years old when I joined the band. I left when I was about 24. and had 6 years of being a rock star. And I say we did work very hard, 300 days a year. Had no time to grow as a person. So I was very immature. And at that time, I just said, well, there has to be more than this. So I traveled a bit, went around, did a lot of things, and basically have grown through doing a lot of recording sessions, various stuff, and writing songs. It's been real helpful. I mean, like we touched on today, the technologically advances now of the drum machines and so forth. That's a really big influence now. Like everyone is used to this perfect meter, which personally I love. You know, it's great. I like that. So I can just sit there with my headphones, pump out a pattern, and sit in my own little world, not bother anybody. When we first started out, that concept of just doing that was absurd. You'd have to have an amplifier and drive the neighbors crazy.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, we've been playing constantly, and I mean, when gigs were a little bit light on the ground, we went further afield, and so in the last 5 years, we've been to India twice to take rock and roll play there, if you can imagine that.
To Russia, right?
We went to Russia. We've done Brazil. We've been to some pretty strange places. Well, the bass player and drummer Martin and Steve were playing in a three-piece with Martin's brother in a club in West Hampstead, and Miles was just in the audience. He had this idea about
it was actually their last concert. These guys were so broke, they'd come up from another part of the country, and they went to London to try and make it and couldn't. They're on their last legs. They're doing this one gig, and Miles is in the audience. So they get together, and I think between them they decided they wanted to form a band, and that's where they say put in the ad, which we answered. That's sort of how it started.
Yeah, we just started rehearsing down in the basement down there, and
we used to kick Stuart out of the. By that time he was just a little guy in his shorts, practicing the drums. So I said, well, come on, Stu, get out there. We got to practice.
Thank you very much.